When a power-hungry HOA president blocked the only path to his family's cabin, she thought she'd won. But she didn't realize. Her target was a professional cartographer. What followed wasn't anger or shouting. It was a perfectly mapped act of revenge that destroyed her reign. One line and coordinate at a time. The head of our HOA, a woman we'll just have to call Brenda, thought a couple of flimsy sawhorses could cut me off from my family's cabin. She actually believed her smug little notice, printed in an offensively bold font and laminated against the elements, along with some cheap plastic tape, would be enough to stop me from reaching the one place on Earth that feels like home. She had no idea who she was dealing with. She thought she was picking a fight over a piece of land, a simple dirt path through the woods. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly comprehend, was that she was declaring war on a professional cartographer, a man who not only knows every single inch of this land, but more importantly, knows the intricate, unassailable laws that govern it. She thought she was just closing a trail. What she really did was open a door to her own spectacular and very public downfall. To truly understand why this felt like such a profound violation, a punch to the gut that knocked the wind out of me, you have to understand what this cabin is. It isn't just a building made of wood and nails. It's not a vacation home, an investment, or an asset to be listed on a spreadsheet. It's a part of me, a part of my family's soul. Rendered in timber and stone, my grandfather, a man with hands like old leather, and a heart as vast and steady as the lake itself, built it from the ground up back in the late 1960s. He was a telephone lineman, a man who understood hard work and the simple elegance of things that were built to last. He found a small, overlooked parcel of land that everyone else had dismissed as too steep and too rugged. It was thick with ancient pine and sturdy oak, sloping right down to the crystal-clear water of Heron Lake. He saw not an obstacle, but an opportunity. He and my grandmother spent every single summer of their lives there from that point on. Using timber milled from trees on the property, he single-handedly erected a simple, sturdy A-frame cabin. It wasn't fancy, and it was never meant to be. It was, and still is, essentially one big room with a cozy sleeping loft tucked under the steep pitch of the roof. The centerpiece is a magnificent stone fireplace he built with rocks he pulled himself from the lake bed, each one chosen and placed with intention. And then there was the wide porch, his masterpiece, perfectly angled to face the sunset over the water. That cabin is a living museum of my family. The moment you open the door, you're hit with a scent that I can't find anywhere else on Earth. A combination of old pine, wood smoke that has seeped into the very grain of the walls, and the faint, sweet smell of my grandmother's cherry pipe tobacco. Even decades after she's been gone, I can still see my grandfather on that porch, his calloused hands patiently guiding mine as he taught me how to tie a fishing lure, his voice a low, comforting rumble against the backdrop of chirping crickets. He was one of the men, along with a few other original cabin owners like old Mr. Henderson and the Albright brothers, who first cleared the trail in question. It wasn't some official sanctioned project. It was just neighbors helping neighbors, a concept that seems almost foreign now. They saw a shortcut from the main road to the best fishing spot on the lake, and, over a series of weekends fueled by beer and camaraderie, they worked together with saws, shovels, and sheer grit to make it happen for everyone. It was born out of community, for the community. That trail became a physical timeline for my life. It's where my dad, on a damp spring morning, knelt in the mud and taught me how to distinguish the track of a deer from that of a coyote. It's where I had my first kiss, a clumsy, heart-pounding, nervous moment under the sprawling branches of a giant oak tree, the air thick with the scent of summer. It's the very path I walked in a daze the morning after my grandfather passed away, the crunch of leaves under my feet, the only sound, just to feel close to him one last time. When my own daughter came into the world, The first place I wanted to take her was the cabin. Her first real, wobbly steps were taken on that sun-drenched porch. Her first hike was on that very trail. Her tiny, trusting hand wrapped tightly around my index finger as she pointed at squirrels and butterflies with wide-eyed wonder. So, yes, the cabin and the trail are more than just wood and dirt to me. They're my history. They are my sanctuary. Before Brenda showed up, the entire Lakeside Meadows community felt that way. It was a relaxed, live-and-let-live kind of place. The HOA was a formality, really. It existed to organize the annual 4th of July barbecue and to make sure the roads got plowed in the winter. Its purpose was to foster community, not to police it. It was a neighborhood built on mutual respect and shared history, not a list of rigid, soul-crushing rules. We were neighbors. And then, without warning, everything changed. Brenda and her husband, a perpetually silent man who seemed to function more as an accessory than a partner, arrived about 3 years ago. Their entrance was not subtle. They bought the old Miller cabin, a charming, classic little structure that had been there since the beginning, and promptly tore it down. In its place, they erected a monstrous gray cube of a house that looked like a dystopian spaceship had crash-landed in our rustic woods. It was all sharp angles, cold, sterile glass, and an unnaturally green carpet of turf that seemed to mock the natural forest floor around it. That architectural monstrosity should have been our first clue. Historically, nobody ever wanted to be the HOA president. It's a thankless, unpaid, and often frustrating job. But when the old president, a kind, elderly gentleman named George, had to step down due to his health, Brenda didn't just volunteer. She pounced on the opportunity with a weird, hungry enthusiasm that should have set off alarm bells. At the community meeting, she gave a slick, polished speech, peppered with corporate jargon that felt alien in our clubhouse. She spoke of optimizing community value, enforcing compliance for aesthetic uniformity, and proactive governance. We all kind of looked at each other, confused but too polite to object, and shrugged. We voted her in, mostly out of apathy. It was the biggest mistake our community ever made. The change was instantaneous and jarring. The friendly, one-page monthly newsletters that used to feature pictures of the annual fishing derby were replaced with multi-page legalistic documents printed on an ugly, aggressive shade of yellow paper. The first new rule was about mailboxes. Suddenly, a bylaw was passed requiring everyone to purchase the exact same specific model of a black metal mailbox from a single pre-approved vendor. People with charming, hand-painted boxes that had been part of their family's property for 30 or 40 years were slapped with violation notices. Old Mrs. Gable, who had a beautiful mailbox painted with bluebirds by her late husband, was heartbroken. Then came the war on lawn ornaments. Garden gnomes were officially banned as tacky. Wind chimes were declared a noise nuisance. A new rule stipulated that holiday decorations could only be displayed for a strict 2-week period. No exceptions. The very things that gave our neighborhood its character were being systematically eradicated. My first personal run-in with Brenda was over something so mind-bogglingly stupid, I initially thought it had to be a joke. I maintain a small 10 by 10 foot patch of native wildflowers near the edge of my property, bordering the woods. My grandmother had loved them, and they are fantastic for the local bee and butterfly populations. One afternoon, I found a violation notice taped, not placed in the door, but taped directly onto the wood of my front door. It stated that my unmanaged and overgrown foliage was a violation of the new aesthetic code, and that I had 14 days to remove it and replace it with approved. Uniform shrubbery, I called her, trying to be reasonable. I explained that they were native wildflowers, not weeds, and that they had sentimental value. Her response was ice-cold and delivered with a voice dripping in condescension. "Rules are rules," she said, as if speaking to a difficult child. We can't make exceptions for sentiment. It's about maintaining a consistent and manicured appearance for the good of the community. It became painfully clear that she wasn't just a stickler for rules. She was intoxicated by the minuscule amount of power she had been given. She took to patrolling the neighborhood in her silent electric golf cart, a clipboard resting on her lap, just looking for infractions. Her eyes would scan each property with a predatory focus. She seemed to derive a genuine perverse thrill from catching someone, from taping one of her yellow notices to their door. And her favorite phrase, the justification for every petty new decree, was always the same. It's for the good of the community. But we all knew it was only for the good of Brenda. The friendly, welcoming neighborhood we loved was rapidly turning into a place of suspicion, resentment, and fear, all because of one woman's insatiable need for control. I drove up to the cabin on a Friday afternoon in late September. The air was just starting to get that crisp, clean autumn edge, and the leaves on the maples and oaks were beginning their slow, beautiful burn into shades of crimson and gold. It had been a brutal week at work, filled with deadlines and pressure, and my entire being was crying out for the simple solace of the cabin. All I wanted was to hear the crackle of a fire, feel the familiar weight of a fishing rod in my hand, and watch the sun go down over the lake. I could physically feel the stress melting off my shoulders as I turned onto the familiar gravel road leading to the trailhead. I parked my car in my usual spot, a small clearing just off the road. I grabbed my backpack from the passenger seat, took a deep, cleansing breath of that pine-scented air, and turned to walk the last 10 minutes to my sanctuary. And that's when I saw it. It was an insult crudely constructed from cheap wood and plastic. Two ugly, splintered sawhorses had been dragged across the mouth of the trailhead, draped with that obnoxious yellow caution tape that seemed to vibrate with malevolence. Stapled squarely to the middle was a laminated sign. The text was printed in an aggressive all-caps font that practically screamed off the page. "Trail closed by order of the Lakeside Meadows HOA," it declared. "This is not a public thoroughfare. This area is HOA common property. Violators will be fined and prosecuted. No exceptions." For a few long seconds, I wasn't even angry. I was just profoundly confused. I stood there staring at it, my brain refusing to process the scene. It was like finding a padlock on your own bedroom door. The sheer absurdity of it just didn't compute. This trail wasn't some random path. It was inextricably linked to the cabin. My grandpa helped build it. The idea that Brenda, with her gray cube house and her lust for control, could just close, it felt like a prank. The confusion quickly evaporated, replaced by a hot, rising tide of anger. I pulled out my phone and called Brenda. It went straight to her smug-sounding voicemail greeting. I didn't leave a message. Instead, I sent a text, my fingers jabbing at the screen. "Brenda, what is this barricade on the trail to my cabin? You can't be serious." A few agonizingly long minutes later, my phone buzzed with her reply. It was as cold and impersonal as a corporate memo. "The board has decided to close all unauthorized paths on HOA common property due to liability concerns. This decision is final and non-negotiable." My thumbs were shaking with rage as I typed back. "Unauthorized? That trail has been used by families here for 50 years. It's how I access my property." Her reply came back almost instantly. "Past use does not legitimize a current violation. Please respect the board's directive and use alternative routes." I knew arguing with her via text was a fool's errand. I got back in my car, the engine roaring to life with a sound that matched my fury, and drove straight to her sterile gray mansion. She was in her front yard, meticulously trimming an already perfect hedge into an even more perfect geometric shape. She looked up as I walked across her pristine turf, a thin, self-satisfied smile playing on her lips. She knew exactly why I was there, and she was savoring the moment. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice dripping with fake, saccharine politeness. You blocked the trail, Brenda, I said, trying my best to keep my voice steady and even. The board, she corrected me, emphasizing the word, secured an unsafe and unauthorized path on common land. It's a simple matter of risk management. Risk management? I shot back, the effort to remain calm failing. That path is the primary access to my cabin. It's been used safely for half a century without a single incident. My grandfather helped clear that land with his own hands, she actually scoffed, a short, sharp, dismissive sound. And that's precisely the problem. It was never officially approved. It's not on the community plat map as a designated walkway. Therefore, it's a liability. What if someone tripped and broke an ankle? The HOA would be sued. She said the word sued as if it were the boogeyman hiding under the bed. So your solution is to just cut off access to my cabin? To my private property? I asked, incredulous. There are other routes, she said, with a careless, dismissive wave of her hand. You can walk along the main road. It's only an extra mile or two. An extra mile. Or two. Carrying groceries, gear, fishing equipment, and sometimes my little girl. The casual, thoughtless cruelty of it was staggering. This wasn't about liability. This was about power. She was enjoying this. She was flexing her authority. And my family's history, my sanctuary, was just collateral damage in her petty kingdom. It was in that moment, looking at that smug look on her face, that I knew this wasn't some bureaucratic misunderstanding. This was a declaration of war. At first I tried to do things the right way. I clung to the naive belief that if I presented a logical, reasonable case, the system would work, and fairness would prevail. That was my first and biggest mistake. I spent an entire weekend meticulously drafting a formal, professional appeal to the HOA board. It was a comprehensive document. I laid out the trail's entire 50-year history. I scanned and attached old, faded photographs of my family on the path, dating back to the 1970s. I even went door to door and got written statements from other longtime residents who remembered the trail's creation and had used it for decades. In the appeal, I acknowledged her stated liability concerns and, in a spirit of cooperation, proposed several solutions. We could form a volunteer maintenance group to ensure it was always clear and safe. We could install a small, tasteful sign at the trailhead that read, "Use at your own risk." I was trying to find a compromise. I sent this detailed packet via certified mail to Brenda and the other two board members, a quiet, browbeaten guy named Frank, and Brenda's obvious sycophant, a woman named Carol. A week passed. Then, I received a curt, one-sentence email from Brenda's official HOA account. Your appeal has been received and will be added to the agenda for next month's HOA meeting. So, I waited. For a whole month, every trip to the cabin involved the humiliating 25-minute walk of shame along the shoulder of the main road, cars whizzing past. Every time, I had to walk past the ugly sawhorses and that laminated sign, a constant mocking reminder of her power. Finally, the meeting day arrived. It was held in the sterile community clubhouse she had renovated in 50 shades of beige. The atmosphere was tense. When she finally got to my agenda item, dead last, of course, she looked at me and said, "The floor is yours. You have 3 minutes." I stood up, my appeal packet shaking slightly in my hand. I poured my heart out. I spoke about my grandfather, about the spirit of community that built the trail, about 5 decades of safe, uneventful passage. I spoke about my daughter learning to walk on that path. I could see nods of sympathy and understanding on the faces of my neighbors seated around the room. I looked at the board. Frank was staring intently at his hands, refusing to make eye contact. Carol looked utterly bored, occasionally glancing at her phone. Brenda just watched me, her expression completely blank, her posture unnervingly still, like a lizard waiting for a fly. When I finished my 3 minutes, she didn't allow for any questions or discussion from the other residents. "Thank you for your presentation. she said flatly. The board has reviewed your appeal prior to this meeting. All in favor of upholding the closure of the unauthorized path? She and Carol shot their hands into the air immediately. Frank hesitated for a moment, his eyes darting around the room, before his hand went up slowly, reluctantly. The motion carries, Brenda announced, a flicker of raw triumph flashing in her eyes. The closure is permanent. The trail is situated on HOA common property, and as such, the board has full authority. Next item on the agenda. I was floored, humiliated. After the meeting, a few of the older residents came up to me, whispering about how rotten it was, how Brenda was out of control. But they were all terrified of her. They told stories of receiving hefty fines for the color of their curtains or the length of their grass. She ruled by fear, and her threats of legal action kept everyone in line. The final nail in the coffin came a few days later, in a community-wide email from Brenda. She didn't use my name, but the target was unmistakable. She spun a dramatic tale about her difficult but necessary decision to protect the community from the unacceptable risk of a severely eroded, hazardous trail that posed a clear and present danger. To prove her point, she attached a blurry, out-of-focus photo of a single fallen branch lying across the path. She was actively, maliciously painting me as a reckless villain who was willing to endanger the entire community, all because I wanted to walk to my own cabin. That's when I knew with absolute certainty, playing by her rules was a game I was designed to lose. I left that humiliating meeting completely and utterly defeated. For the next couple of weeks, I just stewed in a toxic brew of anger and frustration. The cabin, my lifelong sanctuary, now felt tainted by the conflict. Every thought of it was tied to her smug face and the ugly yellow tape. It felt like she had won, like she had successfully poisoned the one place that was supposed to be my refuge. I buried myself in work, hoping the complex problems and detailed analysis would offer a distraction. I'm a cartographer and a GIS analyst. I spend my days living in a world of maps, not the simple road maps you find in a glove box, but complex, layered digital canvases of survey plats, legal deeds, topographical data, and easements. My job is to dig through decades, sometimes centuries, of records to find the objective, legal, geographical truth buried under layers of data. One Tuesday afternoon, I was deep into a project for a client, trying to untangle an ancient property dispute in a rural county. I was layering a scanned survey map from the 1950s over modern high-resolution satellite imagery, clicking through property lines, zoning regulations, and legal boundaries. I was tracing a forgotten right-of-way when a thought sparked, a tiny flicker in the fog of my frustration. Brenda's entire case, her entire justification for this war, rested on one single, foundational fact. The trail was on HOA common land. Everyone, including me, had just accepted that as the truth. But what if it wasn't? What if, in her arrogant rush to assert power, she had made a mistake? Or, what seemed even more likely, what if she was lying, betting her entire position on the certainty that no one in our quiet little community would ever have the skill, resources, or knowledge to check her claim? It was like a switch had been flipped in the center of my brain. The helpless anger and simmering despair that had been clouding my thoughts for weeks instantly vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp, exhilarating focus. This wasn't an emotional fight anymore. This wasn't a matter of opinion or community politics. This was a data problem. A question with a binary, provable yes or no answer. And I possessed the exact, highly specialized professional skill set to find it. A slow smile spread across my face for the first time in a month. She thought she was picking on some random homeowner she could easily intimidate and overwhelm. She had no idea she'd just messed with the one person in the entire community who could dismantle her entire world with a keyboard, a GIS software license, and a deep, intimate knowledge of public records. The hunt was on. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was a cartographer, and I was about to map her spectacular downfall. I didn't sleep that night. Fueled by a potent combination of strong coffee and a burning sense of purpose, I dove headfirst into the county recorder's digital archives. For most people, this online portal is a dry, impenetrable maze of legal documents. To me, it was a treasure chest, and I knew exactly where the treasure was buried. The first thing I did was pull the master plat map for the entire Lakeside Meadows development, filed in 1965. I downloaded the high-resolution scan and layered it into my mapping software, georeferencing it so it aligned perfectly with modern coordinates. Then, the real fun began. One by one, I started adding the layers. I pulled the property deeds for every single lot that bordered the trail. I downloaded the HOA's own articles of incorporation and bylaws, which detailed the exact parcels that constituted common land. Finally, I added the most important layer of all: every recorded easement, right-of-way, and covenant filed since the development's inception. Using a combination of GPS data from my own phone and high-resolution aerial photos, I meticulously traced the exact path of the barricaded trail. The first discovery was satisfying, but it wasn't the knockout punch I was looking for. As it turned out, about 90% of the trail was not on HOA common land at all. It actually weaved like a thread across the rearmost edges of 4 different privately owned lots, belonging to homeowners who either didn't know or, more likely, didn't care. The HOA had no jurisdiction here whatsoever. But then I found it. The smoking gun. A huge chunk of the trail, a section nearly 200 yards long, ran perfectly and precisely inside a 20-foot-wide corridor that was clearly labeled on the original 1965 plat map with the letters PUE, a public utility easement. This is a legally protected right-of-way granted to utility companies to access and maintain their equipment. Things like power lines, water mains, or in this particular case, an old underground telecom cable. An HOA has absolutely zero authority to block, obstruct, or in any way impede access to a PUEE. In fact, doing so is explicitly illegal under state and county law. My heart was pounding in my chest. This was it. This was the key. But I wasn't done. A new, more predatory thought entered my mind. If she was this arrogant and sloppy about the trail, what other corners had she cut? What other rules had she bent for herself while holding everyone else to an impossible standard? I panned the digital map over to her address, 114 Willow Point Drive. I pulled up her property survey from 3 years ago when she built her concrete box. I layered it over the master plat map and the easement data. I zoomed in, tracing the lines of her house, her driveway, and her brand-new, oversized 3-car garage. And then I saw it. It was almost too perfect to be true. I had to check the measurements 3 separate times, running a digital verification tool to confirm the coordinates. There was no mistake. There was no ambiguity. The back wall of her enormous garage, for its entire 40-foot length, was built a full 5 feet inside that very same public utility easement. She had constructed a permanent, concrete foundation structure on a legal right-of-way that belonged to one of the largest telecommunications companies in the country. I leaned back in my chair and just let out a low, long whistle. The sheer beautiful irony of it was breathtaking. It was poetic justice of the highest order. The very land rules, the plat maps and easements she had used as a weapon to bully and control me were about to bring her entire world crashing down around her. My revenge wasn't going to be an emotional argument at an HOA meeting. It was going to be cold, factual, and delivered by men in hard hats and corporate lawyers, all set in motion by a few quiet, precise keystrokes. The next morning, armed with a file of irrefutable, professionally prepared evidence, I made 2 phone calls and sent one email. First, I submitted a formal, digital inquiry to the county's Planning and Zoning Department. I kept my tone polite and professional, framing it as a GIS analyst seeking clarification. I attached a series of crystal-clear, color-coded maps I had prepared, clearly showing the HOA's illegal barricade, obstructing the PUE. I politely asked them to clarify the county code regarding the obstruction of a public utility easement and what the penalties for such an infraction might be. Second, I called the main number for the regional engineering department of the massive telecom company that owned the easement. After navigating a brief phone tree, I got a hold of a supervising engineer. I calmly explained that I was a GIS analyst who had, while reviewing public records for a personal project, identified a permanent, unpermitted structure, a garage, that had been built directly over their legally recorded access corridor. You could practically hear the tone on the other end of the line shift from bureaucratic boredom to intense, focused interest. He asked me to email him the data immediately. Finally, the email, the checkmate. I composed a new message addressed to the HOA board, Brenda, Frank, and Carol. But in the BCC field, the blind carbon copy field, I meticulously added the email address of every single homeowner in the Lakeside Meadows Association. The subject line was simple and devastatingly neutral. Follow-up inquiry regarding trail closure and property line discrepancies. In polite, unemotional, and surgically precise language, I laid out the indisputable facts. I attached Map A, which clearly demonstrated that the vast majority of the trail was not on HOA land, and therefore the board had no jurisdiction. I attached Map B, which highlighted the section of the trail that fell within the public utility easement. I pointed out that by erecting the barricade, the board, led by Brenda, had exposed the entire HOA, and by extension, every single dues-paying homeowner, to significant daily fines from the county and potential lawsuits from the utility company for impeding access. Then, I delivered the final crushing blow in the last paragraph. On a separate but related note, I wrote, "My comprehensive review of the plat map indicates that the garage structure located at 114 Willow Point Drive appears to extend approximately 5 feet into the same public utility easement. I have attached Map C for your review. Given the potential for catastrophic fines and a court-ordered removal of the encroaching structure at the owner's expense, I felt it was my civic duty to bring this to the board's immediate attention for the protection of the community." I hovered my mouse over the send button for a second, savoring the moment, and then I clicked. The fallout was swift and glorious. Within 48 hours, a county official had served a cease and desist letter to the HOA, threatening daily fines of $500 for each day the barricade remained. The following Monday, a gleaming white telecom truck rolled up to Brenda's house, and 2 men with survey equipment proceeded to drive bright orange stakes into the ground, marking a line that went straight through the back wall of her precious garage. A week after that, she was served with a formal legal notice. Remove the encroaching section of her garage within 90 days, at her own expense, or they would not only sue her personally for the demolition costs, but also for punitive damages. The community went into an absolute uproar. An emergency HOA meeting was called, not by Brenda, but by a petition signed by dozens of furious homeowners. The clubhouse was packed. It was standing room only. An old resident named Bill, a man Brenda had fined for having a bird bath, stood up, his hand shaking as he held a printout of my email. "Is this true, Brenda?" he demanded, his voice booming through the silent room. "Did you expose all of us to financial ruin over a personal grudge? And is it true that your own garage is the single biggest violation in this entire community?" Brenda's face turned beet red. She tried to bluster, to talk about misinterpretations and pending legal review, but the maps were undeniable. The evidence was absolute. Frank, the timid board member, stood up and resigned on the spot, stammering an apology to the community. The meeting descended into shouting. A motion for a vote of no confidence was called, and she was unceremoniously stripped of her title right there, in front of everyone she had terrorized for 3 years. She and her husband, silent as ever, just stormed out of the clubhouse amidst a chorus of angry accusations. The very next day, the sawhorses and the yellow tape were gone. I walked down to the trailhead, and it was as if they had never been there. I walked the full length of the trail for the first time in months, and the air just felt cleaner, lighter. My sanctuary was open again, reclaimed. Brenda and her husband became ghosts in the neighborhood they once ruled. The golf cart patrols stopped. She was no longer seen at community gatherings. We'd occasionally spot her getting her mail, her face drawn and tight, before she'd hurry back inside her gray fortress. A few months later, a for sale sign appeared on their perfect manicured lawn. They ended up selling the house at a massive loss. The back of the garage still a torn-up, chaotic mess from the partial demolition required to comply with the telecom company's order. It stood as a fitting monument to her own hubris. The new HOA board is made up of reasonable, long-time residents. Their very first official act was to pass a motion formally recognizing the historical trails as valuable community assets. They even used one of my maps as an official exhibit in the community minutes, codifying the trail's protection for good. A quiet, peaceful normalcy has returned to Heron Lake. The sense of community, once fractured by suspicion and fear, has begun to heal. Every time I walk that path now, I feel a deep sense of satisfaction. I smile when I pass the big oak tree and the spot where my dad showed me the animal tracks. Justice, I've learned, is a dish best served with precise, accurate, and irrefutable cartography. So, what do you think? Was my revenge too calculated? Or did Brenda get exactly what she had coming to her? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. And if you've got your own HOA nightmare story, I definitely want to hear it. We can compare notes. In the end, this was never just about a dirt trail. It was about standing up to a bully who used petty rules and imagined authority to feel powerful at the expense of others. She learned the hard way that if you push someone too far, if you try to take away something that truly matters to them, you might just push them to discover a very specific professional skill they can use for some truly sweet and poetic revenge. Remember, while the laws and specifics can change depending on where you live, the public record is a powerful tool available to everyone. The cabin is quiet once more, the lake is calm, and the path, my path, is clear.